he's hitting the trail with renewed vigor as we head into the home stretch, and he's calling for a new direction for U.S. foreign policy. This week, claims by North Korea that it detonated a hydrogen bomb have brought those issues back to the forefront of this campaign. Presidential candidate Senator Marco Rubio joins me now. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator.
Thank you.
We should still point out that it is undetermined whether this was an actual hydrogen bomb or not, but it's clearly a reminder that North Korea can really turn the table upside down if it wants to every once in a while.
It's a reminder of what I've been saying for years, and that is that it's governed by a lunatic. The leader of North Korea is a lunatic, but he happens to possess not just already a nuclear capability, potentially a hydrogen bomb, which is much more capable than a nuclear weapon, and an increased capacity in intercontinental missiles, which are those long-range missiles that some believe already have a range that can hit California. This is a very significant issue, and that's why I've said that we need to return them to the list of state sponsors of terror. Number two, we need to sanction their leadership who have significant assets abroad. Number three is we need a missile defense shield for the United States. And number four, we have to reverse these defense cuts and rebuild our Navy in particular so we can have a presence in the Asia-Pacific region, not just to counter any North Korea contingency, but also the expansionism that's going on with China in the South China Sea.
It feels like we've been seeing these headlines, not just with Kim Jong-un, but his father, for so long now. Could we be stuck in this for another 50 years of his reign here? How do we break out of this cycle of them throwing a temper tantrum and then having to respond?
Yeah, obviously the internal dynamics of North Korea are bizarre. It's a very strange regime, it does brutal things to its own people. They have death camps in North Korea, and so it's a horrifying situation. Our national interest is in ensuring that they can't do anything to threaten the United States, and they are increasing the capability that they have in these long-range rockets. So we've never had a time in the world where a lunatic, literally a lunatic, possesses long-range missiles and a nuclear warhead capable of striking the United States. And so we need to act with a sense of urgency about having the sort of missile defense systems that are necessary to prevent that from ever hurting our people.
Let's game plan a little bit with an idea of what could happen here. North Korea launches just conventional missiles at South Korea and Japan, potentially tens of thousands of lives lost. Then China and the United States have to essentially decide what happens next. What does President Rubio do if something like that happens?
Well, what would happen is any sort of attack by North Korea against South Korea will be met with disproportional result. In essence, South Korea already has established a rule of engagement where if they get hit by one rocket, they're going to respond with 4. You could then see an escalation, and the escalation could come in the form of a nuclear attack on South Korea, and that's why it's so critical for the United States to have naval assets in the region, along with the Japanese, who are a very capable force to neutralize that. Now, if North Korea were to ever start an all-out war, it would be the end of the North Korean government. We, between ourselves, the Japanese and the South Koreans, we have the capability to bring that to an end. But in the process of doing that, they could get off an attack of nuclear proportions on some of their neighbors, and potentially, if they have a long-range rocket, launch one against the United States. This is a very unpredictable individual because he's nuts. He's crazy. I mean, I don't say that lightly. The guy's not well, and he's dangerous. And so we need to have the assets in the region to respond. So I think our response is already established by protocol, what we would do in every step of the way. And it would involve the elimination of that government. They would be, at that point, gone in terms of our response militarily. But we have to have the naval assets in the region to be able to do it, and we may not if we continue with these defense cuts that even some of my opponents in the Republican primary support these defense cuts.
We've just seen another possible attempted attack of terrorism in France on the Charlie Hebdo anniversary. How do we prepare for both the threat of North Korea and a conventional or possibly nuclear war while also maintaining this presence that has to deal with these low-level kind of micro-threats from Islamic terrorism?
Well, I would say they're not micro-threats. I mean, they're, well, in that particular sense, right, that case in Paris, we have 5 major challenges. We've talked about them consistently on this campaign. The lunatic in North Korea, Chinese making illegitimate claims in the South China Sea and their hacking and all the things they're doing there, Russia and their aggressiveness in Europe under Vladimir Putin, and then you've got 2 apocalyptic movements, basically 2 movements who believe that they're going to bring about the emergence of the Imadi, which is the hidden imam, the messianic figure of Islam, and that they're going to trigger that. One is the Shia government in Iran, and the other is the Sunni movement called ISIS, both increasingly capable. So this isn't what happened in Paris we need to know more about, but in essence, what this guy with a knife is part potentially of a broader issue, and that is these radical jihadists who are carrying out attacks on an individual basis, either people they've infiltrated into the West or people that are radicalized while being citizens of the West. And so it's a new threat. That's why we need to increase our intelligence capabilities and know more. And that's why we have to really re-examine all of our immigration programs to ensure that we're keeping America safe in terms of people coming in.
Let's shift to the domestic side here. You've talked for a while now, but a constitutional convention to restore limited government. This sounds in a way kind of like just like government by other means. How does this not become just a lobbying bonanza or essentially a second Congress or things like that?
It can't. It'll be a convention of the states, not a constitutional convention where you open up the entire Constitution. It would be a convention of the states called by the states for a very defined purpose. In essence, they cannot deal with anything that is not within the call of that convention. And this is an ongoing movement. This is an existing movement called Convention of the States. They've already, I believe 29 states have already voted into it, so I think they're just missing a handful more. And the only thing they would be able to do is do things in the Constitution that would government, not expand it. For example, in the call, the existing call of this grassroots movement, is term limits for Congress. I support that. Term limits for the judges at the federal level. I support that. A balanced budget amendment. You're never going to get those things from Congress. So I encourage people to go on conventionofthestates.com and look up exactly what it is they're working on so you can see it's not about opening up the First, Second Amendment or anything else. It is very limited to that. And as president, I will put the full weight of the presidency in supporting it and in rallying our citizens to join up with that cause.
If it's simply for creating more limited government, how do you get buy-in from your more liberal friends? It seems like if this was a convention that we know about in history, this would be like George Washington telling Thomas Jefferson, well, none of your ideas are welcome.
Well, again, this is not driven by politicians. This is individual people out there signing this petition, pushing their state legislatures to ratify and pass it, to get a sufficient number of states to call the Convention of States. It has nothing to do with, you don't need anything from Congress. You don't need anything from Harry Reid or Chuck Schumer. You need nothing from President Obama. All I've said is that when I'm president, I'm going to tell people I am for this. I hope more states will pass this because this is all driven by people, the citizens. This is about people through the states taking control of their government from a runaway federal government.
Why would you expect the dynamics to be different for that convention than anything that goes on in Washington currently?
Well, because first of all, it's going to be driven by the states, not by the federal government. Second, it's going to be driven by a very specific call, and that is they will either do the things that I outlined, term limits on Congress, term limits on judges, a balanced budget amendment, or they will do nothing at all. There's nothing, they can't go beyond what's already in the existing call. And I expect that once this thing takes hold and people learn about what it is, the groundswell in America, especially to those who get appointed to this convention, each state will have one vote. Now they'll have more than one representative, but each state gets one vote at the convention. I think you're going to see a majority of the states vote for these sorts of things.
Last week we saw President Obama take executive action on the gun issue, obviously not a popular move among Republicans. The president claims his hand was forced by inaction in Congress. Was there any legislation at all that could have passed that might have dealt with the gun issue?
No, and in fact, the president gave a quite emotional and poignant press conference in which he talked about horrific instances of gun violence in America. And I agree, these are horrific instances. But the problem is what he's proposing wouldn't have prevented a single one of them. In essence, you are proposing a solution that would not have solved the problem that you say is what led you to do this. And I think the problem is that we're dealing with gun violence. The president only focuses on the gun part of that equation. We need to be focused on the violence part of that equation. The bottom line is that when it comes to the Second Amendment, it is a constitutionally protected right. If you are going to infringe on that, the standard is very high. That is, you have to prove that what you are doing is necessary. What they are doing is not going to prevent gun violence. Criminals of the kind that are carrying out these attacks, for example, these mass shootings, all of them would have passed a background check, no matter who they bought it from. And habitual criminals, the gangsters that are shooting at each other and people are getting killed in the crossfire, they don't buy guns from retail outlets, from gun shows, or even from individual collectors. They get their guns from the black market, and they don't care what the gun laws are. They're criminals. They know they're not going to pass a background check. They would never try to buy one from someone that conducts a background check. So these things are going to do nothing to prevent gun violence. I think we need to be focused on the violence equation of it, and all that money they're going to spend to enforce this new executive order instead should be spent on enforcing existing laws, like people who are failing background checks and are trying to buy guns, reporting that. People who are selling guns to people that don't pass the background check, prosecuting that. We should be spending more money enforcing our existing laws instead of making up new ones that aren't going to solve anything.
Let's shift a little bit here to the race in New Hampshire. Obviously, there are a lot of other Republicans jockeying for position in this race, and when I talk to operatives from other campaigns, they're always like, oh, that Marco Rubio, he didn't put enough of time here in New Hampshire early on. What do you say to respond to that criticism that you weren't here as much as, say, some of the other candidates who really invested heavily?
Well, the candidates are going to say whatever they think gives them an advantage. The bottom line is we're doing very well in New Hampshire. We're only spending more time as the days go by. I think we've been here basically every other day for the last month and a half or about that equation. Our bus has been here. We've had surrogates come as well. We're going to be right back here again repeatedly. So we're excited about what we're doing here. We're going to continue to work here. Here today, here tomorrow, here earlier in the week, here a week and a half ago. And I feel good about it. You know, I think people in New Hampshire understand, as the first in the nation, they have a very important obligation in nominee for the Republican Party. Our nominee better be someone committed, as I am, to reversing all the damage Barack Obama has done to America. On my first day in office, I'm getting rid of every one of his executive orders. We are going to every one of his illegal and unconstitutional executive orders. We are going to re-embrace the principles of free enterprise, not this government takeover of our economy. We're going to deal with immigration. No amnesty. Sanctuary cities will lose their federal funding. We're going to build the border wall and fencing and add 20,000 new border agents, etc. We're going to get rid of Obamacare, and we are going to rebuild the U.S. military.
The question mark is, obviously, you're in an enviable position in the polls, but getting around the front runner, Donald Trump, no one's been able to do it yet. What can you do to upend his position there?
Well, I would say the voters in New Hampshire, you're the first in the nation in terms of primaries. Your voice is going to be very important in deciding who gets to stay in this race. And I would just say it is important that we have a president who is frustrated with the direction of this country. The economy's not working for us. We're not safe. We're not dealing seriously with the threat of radical jihadists. We have a president that has tried to change America by betraying all of the fundamental things that made us great to begin with. It is important that our president is frustrated about that, and I am. But that alone is not enough. Our president must also be someone that knows exactly what to do about all of these things. And no matter how much we may like how Donald Trump has shed light on some of these issues, he has not proposed or shown us what he's going to do as president. And I think that's a very serious problem. You cannot elect someone to the most important political office in the world if they have not detailed for you exactly not just what they're going to do, but how they're going to do it. And if there's any state in the country that I think holds an important role in examining and fleshing that out from the candidates, it's of course Iowa with the caucuses and New Hampshire with the first in the nation primary. So I hope people will look at our record, what we've done, and the specifics of what we'll do, and they will find a big difference between Donald Trump and myself.
Senator Marco Rubio, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll see you out on the trail.